Welcome to today's Lived Experience webinar. This is the fourth and final session in our Flipping Stigma series, which will focus on the research behind the Flipping Stigma on its Ear toolkit. So my name is Kim McKercher. I'm a provincial coordinator for the Alzheimer Society of BC, and I will be your host this afternoon. And so at this time, I am delighted to introduce our guest speakers. So from the Flipping Stigma research team, we have joining us today Dr. Jim Mann and Dr. Allison Finney. So Jim is the co-lead on the Flipping Stigma research team, who also lives with dementia. He has long been a valuable leader and partner in much of our work at the Alzheimer's Society of BC, both behind the scenes, serving on our board of directors, and contributing his expert knowledge and lived experience to numerous projects, as well as in the public eye, sharing his personal story to break down stigma and inspire others to take action. The University of British Columbia recognized Jim as the most influential person in Canada in countering stereotypes and building a more inclusive society for people living with dementia, awarding him an honorary Doctor of Laws degrees. Welcome, Jim. And Allison is with us today as well. She is a registered nurse and holds a Master of Science degree in nursing from McGill University and a PhD from the University of California at San Francisco. She is the co-director of the Center for Research on Personhood and Dementia and is known internationally for her work on dementia, meaningful activity, and aging. She conducts research in partnership with community leaders and people with lived experience to build knowledge and capacity for supporting personhood and social citizenship of older people, especially those living with dementia and their families. Welcome, Allison. And we're also pleased to have Lynn Jackson, an action group member with the Flipping Stigma team with us today. Lynn began her career as a registered nurse. She is a proud member of the Métis Nation of BC with 6th-generation roots stemming from the Manitoba Cree. Lynn was diagnosed with dementia in 1999. Her current interests include advocating for people with dementia and increasing awareness of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. She has spoken locally, nationally, and internationally to promote better diagnosis, access to treatment, and inclusiveness. Lynn has taken a particular interest in breaking the stigma surrounding a diagnosis of dementia. So thank you, Lynn, for being here today. And then to round out our panel, we are delighted to have our very own Dr. Heather Cook joining us to speak about how the Alzheimer's Society of BC supports the inclusion of people with lived experience in dementia research. So Dr. Heather Cook joined the Alzheimer's Society of BC in April of 2022, having worked in the field of dementia care in both a frontline and research capacity for more than 25 years. She is passionate about improving the lives of individuals living with dementia and their caregivers, be it in the community or in a long-term care setting. She has a master's degree in gerontology from Simon Fraser University and a PhD in interdisciplinary studies from the University of Victoria. She is an adjunct professor in the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia, and Heather also teaches in the Master of Health, Leadership, and Policy Seniors Care program. In her work at the Society, Heather supports the creation and sharing of research for knowledge users, including individuals with lived experience, policymakers, and practitioners. So thank you all so much for joining us today. That was quite a mouthful. You all are very accomplished individuals, and I am very excited that you've joined us today for this discussion. So thank you. Okay, so before we get talking to our panelists, I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro to this webinar series. So as I mentioned, this is the final session of our 4-part Flipping Stigma series. And we've really taken the last year to do a deep dive into the various resources that the Flipping Stigma team has created. And so if you've missed any of our earlier sessions, we did start with a focus on the toolkit itself. And we looked at real life examples of stigma and discrimination that many people living with dementia face. And we discussed how people choose to respond in those situations. And then in webinar 2, we spoke to 2 action group members, Myrna and Lynn, who shared their personal stories of living with dementia. And in part 3, Jim and I had a focused discussion around advocacy and ways that everyone can take a stand against stigma. So if you're interested in learning more about this series, please visit the Flipping Stigma page, which is on the Society's website. and that will provide more information about the toolkit, the Flipping Stigma team, and it will also be where you can find the recordings for the complete series. So that is at alzbc.org/flipping-stigma. And I want to send a special thank you to everyone who has been joining us over the past year to learn more about all the amazing work that's being done by the Flipping Stigma team. So thank you to all of you tuning in. And then we also want, before we turn our focus to the research behind the toolkit, just to provide a very brief intro to what is the toolkit for anybody who might not have been at one of the earlier sessions and may not be familiar with it. So it is an online tool that anyone can use. It was developed by an action group of people living with dementia from across BC in collaboration with UBC researchers and a web designer as part of a CIHR funded participatory action research project. And the goal of the project was to better understand and address dementia related stigma and promote social inclusion of people living with dementia. So, in the toolkit, action group members identify real life experiences of stigma and discrimination, and you can actually hear it in their firsthand voices as there's a multitude of audio clips throughout the toolkit. And they also talk about different ways that they have chosen to respond to stigma and provide tips on how to develop confidence as an advocate. So, it really is a very special resource. The Flipping Stigma on Its Ear toolkit has been peer reviewed by experts and listed on the World Health Organization's Global Dementia Observatory Knowledge Exchange platform as one of their top 10 resources for dementia support, which really speaks to how special it is. And then if you're a researcher that's joining us today, I'd just like to highlight that there is a section of the toolkit that provides some background information about the research study, as well as provides a series of questions that the team hopes will help you reflect on your own research practice and take into consideration when interacting with people who live with dementia. So on the screen in front of you, you will see an example of some of what you'll find in this section of the toolkit. And to learn more about how to use the online toolkit and really maximize its potential, please check out the tutorial video that's linked on the helpful resources document. And last but not least, I want to highlight a second resource that the team put out, and that is the Flipping Dementia Stigma and Action Groups Guide. So this guide was created by the action group members living with dementia to provide direction for future research projects and collaborations where people living with dementia serve as co-researchers and partners in the change-making process. So it showcases what the group accomplished together, how they did it, and they wanted to just create a guide so that people can duplicate what they accomplished and really support anybody who wants to jump in and affect positive change. So it's a great guide to check out. I found it incredibly helpful myself, and it can be found at flippingstigmaguide.com. And again, it's also going to be linked on our helpful resources handout. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll jump into our discussion with our panelists today. Okay. Hi, everybody. So the Flipping Stigma on Its Ear toolkit is in itself an outcome of a participatory action research study. So I think it would be helpful for everybody tuning in today if we started by talking a little bit about what does that mean? And so, Allison, my first question is for you. And if somebody who might not be familiar with participatory action research is tuning in, can you share with us a little bit about what it is and why this type of research is important?
Oh, thank you, Kim. Such a good question. And I will preface this by saying I was no expert in participatory action research when I started this project. So this is really a function of having lived by doing or learned by doing. So what would I say? So I started off as a researcher doing much more kind of traditional work, trying to, as Kenneth Gergen said, trying to understand what is. But more and more in my career, I needed to be able to do work that was going to create new possibilities. So the action piece is super important. So this is about doing work that is about, it's not just building knowledge so that then you can later on go on and put it into practice. It is about making action part of the research itself. And then the other piece of that, being the participation piece, um, speaks to the important role that community members, and I'm using that term very broadly, um, are in doing the work. So this is not work that is led out of an ivory tower by people who have been highly trained in research, who know the state of knowledge, who know what questions need to be asked, and will go out and ask them, perhaps bringing people with dementia in. Like I've always done work with people with dementia. I ask them my questions. The difference here was working with people, really ultimately learning to work with people from the beginning to help even ask the questions. So it's really kind of, there's a power shift there. It is doing work together through really all stages. Um, yeah. And I would say there's lots of ways that people can participate, that people with lived experience can participate in research. But for this project, this turned out to be the right approach to get to where we wanted to get to.
Thank you. That was a really helpful description of what participatory action research is and why it's important. Something that really stands out for me is that collaboration from start to finish and involving people with lived experience in every stage, which you did beautifully throughout this project. And just as a follow-up question, so one thing that's a little bit unique about the Flipping Stigma research team is that there is a person living with dementia who happens to be Dr. Jim Mann, who's with us today, who is one of the team's principal investigators. And so I think that's getting a little bit more common, but for this study is a little bit unique. And so, and we've talked a little bit, Allison, about how it was challenging at first to initially get this study approved when you were first starting out. And then I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that process and how things changed and shifted when you brought Jim on as a co-lead.
Yes. Just before this webinar, I was looking through some old research files for something else. I came across the letter of support from the Alzheimer's Society for this project, dated 2017. So it goes back. We did not get funded that year. Um, Deb O'Connor and I had come together as co-principal investigators. We each had an idea about something we wanted to do. There was a special call coming from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. They wanted to fund research that was about promoting social inclusion and reducing stigma. And the two of us were like, okay, we're not going to compete with each other. We're going to collaborate. We worked long and hard because we each had a vision of what a project could be. We worked long and hard, figured out how to do it. We had a pretty good project. And I think, Jim, you were included as some kind of participant, a collaborator, I believe, on that project. And we had talked with you a bit and you'd given us some comments. We sent it off. It was well reviewed, but not well enough to get funded. So, long story short, we decided that we needed a third PI. Neither Deb or I had ever worked as in co-PI fashion, certainly not with three. But we reached out to Jim to ask if he wanted to be part of the leadership team. So if any of you out there have ever written grants, it's often fairly collaborative, but it is the principal investigators who are responsible for envisioning the project. And it was when Jim came on board. I have very clear memories of sitting in the office at the Center for Research on Personhood and Dementia, Deb in one chair, me in the other, and Jim was on the phone. And we actually put the phone on the chair in a kind of symbolic way and talking through what we thought this research could and should be. And that changed, all I can say is it changed the way that we thought about it. I think it allowed us to make the arguments stronger for why this was important. And at the time, I think it was more unusual than it is now. Even now, I don't think it's too common to have a co-PI. But at the time, it really felt like we were pushing some boundaries. I think that probably helped us. But it changed how we thought about the work.
Thank you so much for providing that context around how you guys got started. And I hope that this experience opens doors for other people living with dementia to follow suit and be involved as co-leads and principal investigators. And so, Jim, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your experience. So you've been actively involved as co-lead of this research project for a number of years now. And you've also mentioned that you are a principal investigator with Dr. Lillian Hung at the IDEA Lab, which I believe is also at the University of British Columbia. But you mentioned that you didn't just jump right into these positions and that it was a bit of a process for you in getting started. So, can you share with us a little bit about how you got started and a little bit about your background in research?
Thank you, Kim. It's a journey. It certainly for me was a real journey. It started slow, which I was very happy about. But um, I was diagnosed in 2007, and I I'd had the experience of dementia with my mother, so I had a sense of where I wanted to put some of my energy as far as dealing with the stigma and so on. And my background is communication and advocacy, so I knew some of these areas would be comfortable for me. But I I look back at my at this journey in research, and it started in 2011, I think, when I got an email invitation to be a part of an advisory group that was really out of Ontario. And so I knew nothing about research. I only thought research was microscopes. So I said, yes, of course I'd do it. Um, and because you only learn by doing, and so I did that for 4 years or whatever, and then Allison introduced me to Lillian Hung, and so I was her advisor as she got her PhD. But so all of that experience with the first project and learning various um, the journey of research in a 4 year program, and then a different part of with Lillian getting her PhD, and then she and I continued to still do work. But um, for me, I needed that background. First of all, living with Alzheimer's, I had to be comfortable with knowing what that meant from my perspective and not my mother's, and um, and then gradually edging into research through that opportunity in 2011, and then gradually with other projects, getting a bit more involved and a bit more involved, so that I understood what um, um, data collection was, and writing papers and so on. And so all of that took time, and so I encourage everybody to be a part of research, but I also encourage them to make sure that they have a good, comfort level with dementia and living with dementia, so that they know and feel confident giving the input that they do along the way to other researchers.
Thanks, Jim. So, a good starting point might be to take some of the dementia education that may be offered by the Alzheimer's Society of BC and other organizations to learn about the diagnosis and build comfort there, and then start getting involved as your own confidence grows. But you don't need necessarily a professional background in research to get started. Thank you. And Lynn, I'd like to ask you a similar question. Just if you can tell us a little bit about how you first got involved participating in research and maybe what helped you build some confidence in this role.
Yeah, like Jim, it was really important to, when I got diagnosed, to learn about my diagnosis and other forms of dementia, which I found, to be fascinating in a pragmatic sort of way, because I did come from a medical background. And it seemed natural to me that when I was asked to be part of research projects, that it was fascinating and I was eager to learn and to be part of the group. I'd been involved in a lot of advocacy in the past, and 4 years ago, when we started what is now the Flipping Stigma project, I was, I found that research the most rewarding of all the advocacy work that I'd done in the past. So that really was, says something, and because I have done a lot of advocacy. And since then, Dr. Lillian Hung also has asked me to be part of a few of her projects. I'm co-lead in one called the Calm Robot Study, and 4 other projects I'm participating in with the Idea Lab. With Dr. Mariko Sakamoto, I'm a co-lead in one that's we're looking at future dementia-friendly communities, more specifically at people living alone. And with Dr. Shelley Canning, I'm part of a research group looking at cancer and dementia. So you can see that people with dementia can participate in, there's, a lot of things that we can help with. And as for what helped me build confidence, I think first and foremost, it was the welcoming attitude of the researchers, the principal researchers, and being able to add my input and to make me feel as if I'm an equal. That really was helpful in building my confidence, and my comfort level increased. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I think both of what you and Jim just shared will help people who might be feeling a little bit anxious or worried about how they might be able to get involved with research and just kind of break down some of those barriers that exist and make it more accessible. So thank you. And I love to hear about all the different projects that you're involved in. All right, Heather, I'd love to ask you a question just for our audience. So there might be people listening in that are interested in getting involved in research and maybe for the first time. And just hoping you can tell us a little bit about how the Alzheimer's Society of BC can help bring research opportunities to people affected by dementia who may live all across BC.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And so great to hear both Jim and Lynn's perspectives there. And I really appreciated, Jim saying it's a bit of a journey, and it didn't start with him sort of being co-applicant on a major grant, right? It was sort of baby steps. And so we get anywhere from about 1 to 3 requests per month from researchers who are looking for people affected by dementia or those who support them to participate in their research study or to participate as members of an advisory committee. So, for folks who maybe are wanting to see what that might look like, they might say, "Yeah, I'm game for participating as an advisory committee member," and others might be like, "Well, I'm just going to stick my toe in, and I'm maybe just going to be a participant this time around." So when the researchers come to us and say that they're looking for folks, we make sure that the study has received the appropriate ethics approval, and then we invite the researcher to share any of the recruitment materials that they have, and then we take those and feature those in a monthly e-blast that we send out from the society. We also feature it on our social media channels, so Facebook or Twitter/X, and also in our newsletters, which come out on a regular basis. And you can also find opportunities for research on another website here in BC called the Reach BC website. And you can think of the Reach BC site kind of like a dating site for researchers and for people who are interested in participating in research. And you can find more about the site and about the opportunities. Now, it's not specific to dementia, but it is health-related research and unique to BC. So you can visit the website. We've listed it in the helpful resources document. So if you get a chance, I encourage you to check out that link. And research opportunities are also available through the Alzheimer's Society of Canada's research portal, which is similar to Reach BC. So it connects researchers with people who are looking to participate in research studies. And on the research portal website, you can find active studies in which you can participate to help advance research in this area. And there's studies for people living with dementia, for caregivers, for family members, and there's also information about clinical trials if you're wanting to become a participant in a clinical trial examining maybe disease-modifying treatments. And again, you can find that link in the helpful resources document. And then one of the other things that we do in the research and knowledge mobilization portfolio at the Society is we hold a series of research luncheons around the province each year, in which we bring together researchers, people with lived experience, and other knowledge producers to connect, to discuss research priorities, and really address how we can better support dementia-related research in the province. And I know Jim has spoken at several of our research luncheons, so I see him nodding there. And I wanted to share a couple of the quotes that we received recently from some of the attendees from our Vancouver research luncheon, because I think they speak to the important role that the luncheons play in connecting those communities, our communities of knowledge producers and knowledge users, and how we better integrate those. So one attendee wrote, "Not only is this a great network opportunity, but I found the panel discussion inspiring, and having the chance to talk to some of the lived experience attendees was a powerful reminder of why I do this work." And then I received an email last week from one of our attendees who it's granting season and there's a big grant competition, the deadline for which is fast approaching. And so this particular researcher was reaching out to see if we were interested in collaborating on a project. And she wrote that she was motivated by the perspectives of several of the people with lived experience who spoke at our research luncheon that was held back in November. And she said, some of the participants talked about the challenges of mood and behavioral changes in dementia. And after doing some reading, she felt this was something we maybe didn't know as much about as we could. And so she has really designed her research grant around what she heard from participants at that research luncheon. So I see both Lynn and Jim smiling there. And certainly it was something I let her know that she made my week because that's really the purpose of why we bring these groups together. So.
Thank you. I love hearing the lasting impact that those research luncheons have had. And thank you for providing all of those great points where people can learn more about research and get more involved with studies that are happening. That's a great starting point for many who may be listening in and wondering how do I go about finding a research study that might be a good fit for me or something that I'm passionate about and interested in. And those research luncheons are happening all across BC, which is lovely to see. I had the pleasure of being at the one in Vancouver and can speak to the discussions that were happening at the tables and how engaged people were with the lived experience panel. Thanks, Heather. All right. Well, I have had the pleasure for the past year to work with many of the members from the Flipping Stigma team during this webinar series, and I had an opportunity last summer to join one of the in-person meetings that happened at UBC. And I just wanted to share what I witnessed because it came across very loud and clear to me that the researchers and the action group members living with dementia truly developed a meaningful bond and genuinely supported each other through this 4-year process, which is a very long time to keep people engaged. And I could feel that it was a sense of community and almost like a family that you had created. And I just wanted to highlight that I think you really did an excellent job in embodying that co-creation model, and that people seemed to be engaged from the very beginning until the very end, and you did a beautiful job at recognizing people's contributions. And so I wanted to take a moment to celebrate that, and then to speak about how beneficial this type of research can be for everybody who's involved, people living with dementia or caregivers, as well as the researchers themselves, and talk about some of the learnings that you may have taken away from this experience that might help others replicate what you have achieved. And so, Lynn, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, just to hear from your perspective as an action group member with the Flipping Stigma team. What stood out most to you about this experience?
I think what stood out most for me was how much work we really did accomplish and how far-reaching that it was around the world. I think most importantly, what stood out for me was that how good our lead researchers were and how that they asked the right questions. I know Allison talked about that earlier, and it is important that we were asked the right questions so that we could do the work. And it was a lot of hard work, both for us people with lived experience and for the researchers, but we did get the job done. Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing that. I know it was a meaningful experience, and I've heard you say, as you mentioned earlier, that it was one of the most impactful experiences you've had in your advocacy work.
Yeah, and actually, at that meeting that you were at, we were, it was a very powerful group in that we pondered if we should write a paper about our experience, and but we thought, jokingly, that it would be difficult to write about a love fest, which we fondly referred to our gathering that day, because we really did become a very cohesive group. And part of that, I think, was because of COVID. We started off in person, and then COVID happened. We had to go on Zoom. Everybody felt a bit lost. So here we had each other. That was a really good bonding experience. We knew we had to keep healthy. We wanted to learn more. We wanted to keep active mentally, and being able to talk more, which keeps us healthy. And plus, we were able to, when we were able to include people from out of the Lower Mainland area, which was really important and really added a lot to our group also. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if there's a silver lining with the pandemic, it was that you were able to expand your group across BC, bring in new perspectives, and I think develop these social connections that were so important to everybody's well-being during that time, where many of us felt incredibly isolated and disconnected from our larger communities. So it's nice to hear about the lasting impact that had. And Allison, I'd like to learn a little bit more from your perspective as a member of the research team. What was it like to be part of this 4-year study? And if there's one thing, I'm sure it's hard to think of one thing that you learned from the experience, but something that you'd like to share with others who might want to lead a similar project. What would be your takeaway?
I thought about that. It's interesting you talked about the leadership, Lynn. From my perspective as one of the PIs on the project, I think what I learned was about leading from behind. My experience was really one of being comfortable. Partly it's my personality. I don't like to be front and center, so I'm comfortable sitting in the back, but often feel that it's not a very effective place to be. I learned to trust that was the right place to be, and to place my trust in an amazing group of people, some of whom I'd known before and some of whom I didn't. So I learned about the importance of trust. Like every time we've had a meeting, I'd come away having learned something very powerful that always surprised me. So I learned to trust that. I learned to trust that this was a group of people. And when I'm talking about the team, I mean the action group, the students, the staff, and the academic folks, everybody. I learned that collectively we had an enormous capacity for hard work, and a lot of trust a lot of creativity and looped into this. So it's not just one thing, but it all kind of sits from that place of leading from behind. And I'm borrowing this term from this phrase from a colleague. And I'm sure she borrowed it from somewhere else too. I'd never heard it before, but learning to go at the speed of trust. We had 4 years and it took all of that time and more. So yeah, that's what I take
Thank
away.
you. I think that's a beautiful takeaway, and really points out how it takes time to build those types of connections and relationships. It doesn't happen overnight, and you trusted that something good was going to come out of this process, and I think you definitely accomplished that. Thank you. All right, Jim, we've talked a little bit about stigma and how stigma isn't always intentional. And so sometimes we inadvertently can perpetuate stereotypes that exist around dementia when we let some of our assumptions guide our interactions with others. And I just wanted to ask you, what tips would you like to share with fellow researchers when it comes to engaging with people living with dementia?
So the webinar is ending at 4:30 today.
3:30. Oh, yeah. Oh, I get it.
Oh dear, where do I start and where do I stop? Um, I co-wrote a chapter a few years ago, and that really focused on unconscious bias. And I think that so many people, for many people generally, and researchers as well, can, without even realizing it, have this assumption of incapability, have the stereotypical model of a person with dementia firmly in the back of their minds, and and that's what many of us try to reinforce, or not reinforce, but to correct through presentations, conversations, whatever, is that you can't assume incapability, that everybody is an individual. And so there is that need to get to know people as individuals. I remember a conference talking about sort of interviews, if you will, people to join a research project. And I think it had something to do with 10 cups of tea. And that's a lot of it, is just understand who they are, understand their capabilities. And that really boils down to listen and learn. I have said that many times, that listen and make sure you do listen before responding, to really learn from each other, to um, as Allison said, she came away from many meetings going, I learned something new. And so many people generally and researchers don't necessarily believe that that would happen. And it just becomes, for researchers, I'm so busy focusing on the project, trying to, collect data and so on. Do I need this added frustration? Do I need this added piece of learning? How to work with an individual with dementia? Thinking, of course, the worst possible aspects for them. And so give it a whirl. Trust your gut, and but definitely leave your biases behind. Leave them at the door, and um, don't engage first with that preconceived notion. And my guess my last point is really don't treat the engagement of people with dementia as a tick in the box. If you're going to do it in a meaningful way, realizing and accepting that they will be capable of making a contribution.
Thank you so much, Jim. I think that was very powerful advice for anyone tuning in today. Thank you. And so we've talked a little bit about some of the learnings from the Flipping Stigma project. And so, Heather, I just wanted to provide an opportunity if there's anything that you would like to share on the topic of dementia-friendly research that maybe we haven't covered yet today.
Well, thanks, Kim. Yeah, just something that I wanted to add was several years ago, the Alzheimer's Society of BC partnered with people with lived experience and some of the design students and folks at Emily Carr University. And they produced a guide that was entitled Collaborate, Gather, and Share. And it was a workbook towards dementia-friendly research. And so the working group produced two guides. There was one for researchers and one for people affected by dementia. The one for researchers is a little bit thicker, a little more detail in that one. And it talks about how we can engage in a meaningful and authentic manner, as kind of Jim alluded to in his comments just now, to make sure that that engagement of research is not just tokenistic, but that we are really engaging on this very authentic and meaningful way. And so both of those resources are available on our website, and you can find the link on that helpful resources handout that I think Lori, one of our colleagues, has popped into the chat. You can also search collaborate, gather, and share. You type that into the search bar on our website, and it will direct you to the right spot.
Thanks, Heather. That sounds like a very helpful resource. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about knowledge mobilization. So I think this is another area that the Flipping Stigma project did really well in. And knowledge mobilization really refers to all of the activities and products that are created that help the research be useful and publicly accessible. So as a team, you were able to produce what I would say a highly functional online toolkit, which has been accessed all over the world. So it's had a global impact. The toolkit has been used in curriculum for workshops in care homes, neighborhood houses, community centers, and for volunteer training programs. And then in addition, as Lynn has mentioned, the action group really wanted to capture the momentum of what you created through this project and put together the action group members guide, which is a second piece to this project, which is available online and I believe in print copies as well. And that provides direction for future research projects and collaborations where people living with dementia serve as co-researchers and partners in the making change process. So to tangible products that have come out of this research team. And so I'd like to direct a question either to Allison, Lynn, or Jim about what do you think was the driving factor behind the success that you've had in getting this research out there to the general public, to care providers and researchers from really all around the world? Is there a secret or anything that you'd like to share?
I have one thing I'd like to share. The note I have here on this question is leveraging our collective networks. From my perspective, so I've got some networks that are important through university, but I have to say, we have two people on the call today whose networks do extend internationally. And the kind of work that you, Lynn, and Jim did behind the scenes to spread the word, I think actually has, in all seriousness, been very influential in moving this work into international space.
I would just want to add also that I think that, you know, we do have a beautiful and very easy to navigate website, which is, you know, kudos to our webmistress and to Heather, who put the words to everything there, helped us with the words. You know, hearing the vignettes of people with dementia is very impactful. So I think that's a big drawing card to help people to understand the stigma and what we're trying to talk about. Our sister, there's a sister project, and Kim, you talked about us going out to different community centers and libraries, adult centers. The Building Capacity Project is very involved with doing this, and I have had the honor of being able to go out to these different various organizations with them, and the toolkit is part of the resources that they use to help their volunteers to better able help people with dementia, volunteers and their staff actually. So it's been really powerful that way. And you know, that's just in the Lower Mainland. So you can imagine that how around the world that would be able to be of a help also.
Yeah, and I can testify myself, the audio clips and the beautiful short films that you produced is really what drove me to the toolkit and had me coming back to the toolkit. I find them incredibly powerful, and I don't think you could replicate that if it was just in text. Hearing the voices of real people works incredibly well.
I would just pop in to say, we don't just have a web designer and you know, someone to help edit. We have a writer and we have a filmmaker. We're working with two artists, and so it's not just the technical skill of being able to do it, but working with them. I think the two of you would agree. We talk about ideas, and they interpret those ideas in very powerful ways that none of us could do so easily. That's important.
Yeah.
They did a beautiful job. Jim, is there anything you wanted to add?
I think part of the impact or the success of getting it out there is, quite frankly, the uniqueness of the project. The very true participation and direction from the people with dementia. And you know, hearing these messages that are directed to caregivers or the researchers or the medical community directly from the people with dementia is pretty powerful, and is something that is not, to my understanding, sort of packaged in the way that our site is, that the Flipping Stigma toolkit is. Because, I mean, we've heard, you leading up to September of some professors using the toolkit for their site, or pardon me, for their students, and in their teaching. But so that played a big role. But in addition to that, I think being on the World Health Organization Global Dementia Observatory, was also a big move in spreading the information out. And, quite frankly, social media. I mean, I am on Twitter and I am on LinkedIn, and so I talked a lot, as I do on webinars. I talked a lot on social media about it, and more than once, and so I think that all of that really came together, but definitely it's as I say, the uniqueness of the project, and the voices being heard throughout that website that made it just that much more powerful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also love how you have different pathways. So you have a pathway on the website for people living with dementia. You have one for healthcare providers and family members and friends, and then you have one for researchers as well. So you've tried to make it very practical and functional for different audiences. And I love the PDF for healthcare providers that, it's something that's something tangible someone could print off and actually take and talk to their doctor, if they're wanting to improve communication between the two parties. So there's a lot packed into that toolkit that people can utilize,
And
and a lot
that's
of hard work.
and it was all done in 80 plus meetings.
Yeah, but well,
Oh my
well worth
goodness.
it. Well worth it.
Sure.
All right. Heather, on the topic of knowledge mobilization, because I know that this is a passion of yours, can you explain a little bit about how the Alzheimer's Society of BC might help researchers with knowledge mobilization?
Absolutely. So you're right. This is a passion of mine, and I think one of the things we can keep in mind is that there's a stat that gets bandied about when we talk about knowledge mobilization and knowledge uptake, and something about it taking 17 years to get between a piece of research before we actually see it implemented in policy or actually action taken as a result. Now that's from a number of years ago, so I don't know if there's a more current stat, but it gives you some idea of the delay that often occurs between research happening and then it finding its way into daily life. And I think, the flipping stigma is a great example of the other extreme in this instance. And so when we talk about knowledge mobilization, we're really thinking about how do we help researchers kind of take the research and how do we connect it with folks who are going to use that research in their everyday lives. It's going to have meaning for folks. And so we try and do that in a number of ways here at the Society. We have our Research Connects webinar series, which typically happen on the second to last Wednesday of the month in the Wednesday webinar series. And those happen every other month. And so what we typically do is invite a researcher to come in and speak on a topic, and we're always open to hearing what topics our community is interested in. So you can always drop a line to research at alzheimerbc.org if you're interested in a particular topic. So that's one thing we do. We also have a focus on research handout, and our 2024 handout is coming out in the next couple of weeks. It's just heading off to the printers, where we offer the opportunity to researchers talk a little bit about their research. We do some interviews with the researchers on the types of research that they're doing. We provide space on our website for finished products, as we've done with the Flipping Stigma handout. So when we get something that's as rich as the Flipping Stigma website, how do we support that and help direct people to that? And then we have our regular newsletters, which feature a Meet the Researcher section and outline some of the work that's being done in dementia-related research. And of course, when we're talking about that research, that covers everything from care, from a cause to a cure. So, and we also can help connect researchers with people with lived experience. So with folks like Lynn and Jim, so that researchers, when they're thinking about how do I best approach my knowledge mobilization, how do I think about what's important for people living with dementia? How do I make it accessible to people? We can help connect them with individuals who can help give feedback on that.
Thank you so much, Heather. That is probably exciting to hear for many of the researchers tuning in, that there's multiple avenues that the Society can kind of help boost your work and reach a wider audience. So thank you. All right, this is my final question for the panel. So what is next for the Flipping Stigma team? And is there further action? I think this is a question, a big question, but is there further action needed to take a stand against stigma and discrimination associated with dementia? And what might be next for how we tackle that?
Maybe I'll start. My first and foremost for me is that I would like to see the website translated into different languages, because the more people we have talking about stigma around the world, we have more chances of combating it. So right now we're just in English. We need to be in a few more languages at least, and that would be helpful.
I think that would be a very impactful next step. Yeah. Anything else come to mind, Allison or Jim, when you think about what might be next?
Oh, the world is our oyster, wouldn't you say? I'll mention the fact that we got additional funding from CIHR. We had a meeting back in November. We brought together people with lived experience, care providers, but especially primary care providers, to have a conversation about what can we do with this toolkit to make things better in primary care, because we know that stigma is an issue in that space. It was an amazing conversation. But again, the work takes time. We're working on the report. It will be out, and it may lead to a subsequent project. We'll see. But at the very least, it will lead to some clear kind of ideas about how to implement in healthcare, which we've not really, that was not the purpose of this project. This was much more community-based. So moving it into healthcare is another space, I think, where there's room for some impact.
I look forward to seeing that report, because I was able to participate in that discussion, and it was very powerful. And you have a wonderful video that we have linked on the helpful resources document that has many voices of people with lived experience talking about their different stigma and discrimination that they may have faced in healthcare settings. And a lot of it is inadvertent, but there's little things we can do to change that and change the way we communicate. And just have true partnerships in healthcare, right? Because ultimately that's what people are looking for, is to be heard and listened to. Just Jim, as you suggested, which is what is important for researchers, is very similar to what's important for healthcare providers as well.
So what is next to for the Flipping Stigma team? Very quickly, one thing is rest. I did say there were over 80 meetings, so rest is going to be high up in the list. But is there further action needed to take a stand? I think that goes without saying. And building off what Allison and what you talked about, as far as the medical community as one area response. One of the researchers, Mariko Sakamoto, and I did make a presentation to a group of medical people sometime last year about the Flipping Stigma toolkit, and played a few clips and so on. And I have to say that I was a bit surprised at a couple of the comments in the survey that was done after the presentation, that, you know, a doctor had said that, well, I guess I'm going to have to change my approach to my patients, you know, with dementia. And there was another one, and I remember thinking at the time, wow, you know, maybe I'm going to say this wrong, but you needed us to tell you, you know, how to interact with people with dementia and or your patients with dementia, like with talking directly to the patient and not to the care partner in the room. So there is a lot of work still to do. I think the action group members feel that and know that directly, and I think that the way the project ended with the guide being produced showed the seriousness members took of the role that they played. That it wasn't just, oh yeah, do it for 4 years and okay, what's next? Or, you know, God, that was boring. You know, what else can we do? But rather, they as a group sat back and said, you know what? We have got something here. This has been a powerful group that has taken their deliberations very seriously and have seen tangible outcomes that are of value, not just, oh yeah, another, you know, another paper, let's go, or a poorly designed website. And so they as a group said that we need to embark on our own knowledge translation, if you will, in creating the guide and telling others or showing others how they could possibly do it, or ways to do it. And so I think that whether some may do something individually or as a group, a part B, or, you know, Flipping Stigma 2.0, or whatever you want to call it. But there is work to do, and I think that they showed why the work is necessary, but they showed that impactful work is possible. And for that, I thank them and congratulate them.
Yeah, and I think we'll see the ripple effect from this study for many years to come. And I can see many people who are involved will carry a passion for this topic forward and into other projects, and just a lens that will probably shape their research moving forward.
I would just add, in the last year when we were compiling the kind of lessons learned in the guide, kind of coming to the point, realizing that we were issuing a kind of call to action. And, you know, as you've said, Jim, you know, I think we're resting, but also reconvening under the umbrella of the Center for Research on Personhood in Dementia as a kind of loosely labeled research advisory group, but a group of people who are committed to change. And I'm going to go out on a limb here because this is a good platform to say this. We've not had this conversation, but it's something in my head. There is certainly enormous, important work to be done to counter stigma and discrimination against people with dementia. We know that to be true. But I'm thinking about like Kaylee's comment that scrolled by a moment ago, that really this is about good communication for anyone. It's like, yeah, this is true. We all have so much to learn. And we are at a time in our world where we're facing multiple challenges. And what I would love to see is people with dementia who are passionate about making social change, about being part of building new knowledge to make our world better in whatever way, would feel that they could become confident to be part of that research work, whether it's about stigma or not. Because certainly what I've learned so much over the years working with people who are older, who are facing a dementia diagnosis, and the wisdom and insights that people have, we will only benefit from that if people are more involved in this work. I feel like I'm starting to blather, but you get my point. I think there's a lot of work to be done. And if anyone wants to do it, come join us.
Thank you, Alison. I think that was beautifully said. And you're right. I think the action guide very much was a call to action, and hopefully will be an inspiration for others, that they can do this. Anybody can do this. You have to have a passion for it, and there's avenues out there and people out there that will support you through this process. And I think a wonderful piece to that is the peer mentors that you'll meet, people like Jim and Lynn who have been doing this for a while, who can take people under their wings who are just getting started and make them help create that safe environment, right? And guidance. So thank you all. I learned a lot from you, and I hope our audience did as well. And I, for one, look forward to what's next for the Flipping Stigma team. I would love to see this work shift into the healthcare field and have a wide impact there as well. And yeah, maybe we can have you back again when that work is fulfilled. All right. Lori, I'm going to turn to you because I haven't had a chance to keep up with the chat. Are there any questions for our lovely group here? Or
There are,
comments?
yeah, lots and lots of rich comments. The two questions that came in, and this one isn't really something that can be answered, but at the same time might be something that one of the panelists could direct this person to. Somebody says, I'm interested in the research on medications. This person was on a particular medication for a number of years and is just curious kind of what is the research into medication and where would they get that information. That's the one question, and I'll hold for a moment before I share the other one.
Thanks, Lori.
I'm happy to take that one, Lori, and just say I'm more than happy to connect offline about that. That's probably the easiest way to do it. So I would encourage whoever typed that in. Sorry, I've had a tough time keeping up with the chat as well. But it's research at alzheimerbc.org, and that will reach our research team. And I'm happy to chat further about that.
Thanks,
Great.
Heather.
Thank you very much, Heather. I just typed that email address into the chat. The other question then, and does fit for all of the panelists, is how can I help? And this particular person says, in my role as a nurse, any nurse. So I can practically see, Alison, you tapping your fingertips together.
And Lynn, too. Lynn, you're a nurse. Do you want to take a stab, Lynn?
You go ahead.
How can you help as a nurse? I think work around raising awareness about the importance of really listening to people with dementia. Because I feel fairly comfortable saying this as a nurse. I don't think we listen very well. I know I'm a teacher at UBC, and I know we don't do a good enough job teaching our nursing students how to communicate well with people with dementia, which is a crying shame because that's just good communication. I think our students leave feeling unsure, uncertain. They feel the stigma and discrimination. They see it. They feel that they can't do anything, but they can do everything. So I think keep opening a space. I feel like I'm blathering, but opening a space for conversation with colleagues and sharing the Flipping Stigma toolkit. We did make a conscious choice in this first step, moving into healthcare, to move into primary care. So there we're thinking nurses, doctors, nurse practitioners, but because that was the priority identified by the action group. But I'll tell you, nursing collectively would probably be right up there as a priority. That was the conversation I had with Jim all those years ago, where I told you what Lillian Hung wanted to do, because you identified a problem with the assumptions nurses were making about you when you were in hospital. I said, well, I have a student that wants to talk to you because you had asked the question, why does it need to be like this? Couldn't this be better?
And I just wanted to add that, a lot of times people have problems and reservations talking to people with dementia, but they really need just to have a compassionate curiosity, just, heartfelt questions. And the person with dementia is more often than not eager to talk, but people are afraid to talk to them. And if you have a nice curiosity, compassion, should work.
Thank you, guys. I think we all have a role to play. I know, Jim, you've said this many times before, as advocates, and just the more we talk about it, we share the resource, we model in our work setting these communication strategies. I think slowly you'll see a shift, but yeah, hopefully everybody tuning in will check out the toolkit, and even if we share it with one person, it starts to really have that impact.
But also
Kim?
share it with the right
Oh,
people. And I think there are structures, the comment about going to the college. There are structures that are powerful that can help us. The World Health Organization has a structure that has helped us raise awareness. So I do believe in the groundwork kind of ripple effect, but also being strategic about making this change, because I started as a nurse many years ago and it hasn't gotten that much better on the ground in that time.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a comment. I think communication is vitally important in every aspect of life. Would help to avoid many a misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
I did notice that there was Sarah had a question, and she says, thanks for a wonderful session. I'm wondering what Lynn and Jim's future research goals are. Jim, Lynn?
Well, I'm involved with a few right now that are keeping me busy, as I'm sure, and I know Jim is also, because we are on a couple of the same. I don't know if as a goal, they seem to fall in our laps, right, Jim? And and that's a good thing, because I'm hoping that it'll come a time where we can cherry pick and take what interests us, and we have enough people that can help that interests them also.
I can say that I really don't have a goal when it comes to research. But I have had the honor of joining a few advisory boards, one, the Institute of Aging with the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and was part of the development of the dementia strategy, and so, and my goal with those is impacting how people with dementia are viewed, how people with dementia can be seen more positively, how growth can happen, but from that different angle rather than research. I'm on an advisory board with Research Ethics BC, and I would hope that some of what I contribute will help that ethics approval process, help the ethics boards to perhaps better understand the 2024 version of people living with dementia, because certainly the 2024 version is a whole lot different than the 2000 version or the mid 90s. And so that is really my goal, is to influence from that other angle, while also having what I like to think as positive influence on some research projects and how they might benefit the broader community and people living with dementia in acute care settings or living in the community.
I agree with everything that Jim has said. And Jim, we have to remember too, that another goal with these is to keeping our brains active and ourselves healthy. It's a bit selfish, but we do it for that also, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've said to my specialist more than once that I would not be here if I wasn't involved, if I wasn't so active. I know that. So.
Mhm. Yeah, I think many of these studies have such a positive impact, and in terms of well-being, social connections, building confidence, all of those things that will just equate to a better quality of life for so many people. All right, then, is there any final words that anyone would like to share with our audience before we end our webinar today?
Thanks for attending and hopefully learning a little bit more about research and doing it with people living with dementia.
And I would say just kudos to the team for really showing what can be done and the possibilities that do exist. And I think is a real inspiration to other researchers who really want to make a difference and engage in that meaningful way. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add, there's lots of opportunities, and for all different kinds of work. At a national level, there's just a lot of, and provincially, a lot of and increasing expectations that people with lived experience will be part of research. And so there's all kinds of people out there, researchers, who want to do this. Some of them are busy and they don't know, and they just need to tick that box so they can help raise awareness in that way. But there's also lots of researchers out there who want to who want to meet people. So I'm assuming there's people with lived experience, carers in our audience, and healthcare providers who can play such an important role on research moving forward, helping guiding the questions, helping guide the knowledge translation efforts. How we can shorten that time period that you talked about, Heather, of getting research, getting the knowledge out there into the public. So there's lots of opportunities.
All right. Well, I would like to thank each and every one of you on the panel for being here, sharing your experiences and insights and learnings from this research project. And then also thank everybody in the audience for tuning in, not only to this session, but for those of you who have tuned in to the entire series. We have, I think, reached quite a number of people and hopefully brought awareness to the Flipping Stigma toolkit. And I encourage anybody who hasn't yet had an opportunity to check it out, please do. I think you will be very pleasantly surprised. And I just want to, thank you for your time. If you are a person living with dementia, or if you're caring for a person living with dementia, we do have the First Link Dementia Helpline available at 1-800-936-6033. You can learn more about that as well at alzbc.org/FLDHL. And as you can see, we have a number of programs and services provided by the Alzheimer's Society of BC to help people stay connected through support groups, Minds in Motion, the helpline, as well as a variety of dementia education available. So we encourage you to check that out. If you are joining us from the Yukon, we are happy to be collaborating with the Yukon government to launch the new First Link Yukon Dementia Helpline specifically for people living in that area. So Yukoners can reach the helpline by calling the toll-free number 1-888-852-2579 to access the help and guidance that they need. And then again, for people in British Columbia, the First Link Dementia Helpline is available in English Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. at 1-800-936-6033. We also have helplines for the Chinese and South Asian communities available from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you will find a link to the recording of today's session on the on-demand webpage, as well as on the Flipping Stigma webinar webpage. And that should be available within a week. And then if anybody is tuning in who is living with dementia or who is caring for someone living with dementia, and you're interested in supporting this Alzheimer's Society's work or in sharing your story, we would welcome you to be a lived experience partner. So please email us at livedexperience@alzheimerbc.org. And thank you again for tuning in today.